I want to welcome everyone to the Light Board meeting for July 10th, 2024. I'm sorry, April 10th, 2024. Sorry, a lot of travel recently. I'm lost track of time. So first thing is to call the meeting to order. Second is upcoming meetings. We have a meeting scheduled for, remind me of the exact date. Sorry, I don't have my agenda open.
April 24th, I believe.
Yeah, so April 24th is what we're hoping to schedule, Laura, because I think it
Right.
wasn't on the previous agenda. So I want to ask Bianca and Warren, April 24th, would you be available to do a meeting?
That's okay with me.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm free as well. We'll check in with John and Alice later. But we're going to add a meeting for April 24th. And then the following one is what date in May?
May 8th.
May 8th. All right. And we're only adding this meeting because of the special town meeting article, which we'll talk about later in the agenda, just so that we have a point in time where we can check in with this board along the road.
Actually, Brian, we do have one other item that is timely and needs to be addressed, and it is a future power supply deal. Another one where they're raising the prices and we have to decide whether we're staying in or getting out.
Okay. Well, we have something to talk about.
And so I'm hoping that we can go into executive session at some point during the April 24th meeting, because the pricing is key to the decision.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know. We'll schedule that in the agenda, and we'll do the whole executive session. If we're doing an executive session, it would be good to kind of talk about that pricing for that, but also help the board understand pricing in general, as we don't do executive sessions often, and it would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Great. And following dates and times would be minutes. And Warren, do you want to go over the minutes that were sent?
Yes, we have two sets of minutes that were sent out for review last June 14th and October 11th. The one comment I received was from John, who noticed that both Bianca and I were left off of the list at the top of the minutes for the October 11th minutes. Other than that, no one had any corrections, and so I hope we could take a vote on this. But I also want to report that I'm pleased that I heard from Jason that Jason and Karen have a plan to catch up on all the minutes by the end of April, so that we won't be dealing with really old minutes anymore. And that'll be very good.
That'll be great. All right. I didn't find any issues with the minutes. Warren, do you want to request a motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve the minutes for October 11th, 2023 and June 14th, 2023.
Great. And Bianca, do you mind giving a second? That's a second. I approve. Bianca, do you approve?
I approve.
Warren?
Yes.
Great. So we've approved minutes. Now we'll go into our first agenda. Oh, we'll go into the director's update. And Jason, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. And just a note that people cannot unmute themselves anymore. So please raise your hand if you would like to be recognized by the chair. And then Brian, once you recognize somebody, I'll allow them to unmute. And that includes the board members. If the board members wish to stay unmuted, you can. So just raise your hand and we'll do that. So thank you, everybody. The first thing I wanted to provide an update on is the director's transition. I don't have a lot to report on. I think that Carrie will probably report more at a future meeting, but I do know that staff have delivered to the town manager a report that includes information about the kind of person that we're looking for and the type of people who would be on the screening committee and the type of questions to ask. Carrie has met with several staff members here at the light plant and has talked to council about general governance questions and has also met with other stakeholders in the organization and outside the organization to sort of get a feeling for next steps. And I don't have much to report other than that, but I know that it's been about 3 months since Dave left. So I would expect that something would come soon in way of next steps. I let the board know via email, but I just want to acknowledge and mention in public that Laura Scott has been promoted to Assistant Director of Power Supply and Energy Management. So congratulations, Laura. She's done a terrific job at managing our power supply contracts and also getting us to a greenhouse gas emitting free power supply several years early. So thank you, Laura, for those efforts. Energy management will now be underneath Laura, and we do plan on backfilling Laura's position at some point. And I know that Jan and her team are incredibly productive, but I know that they're also overwhelmed at times. So hopefully this will be a great partnership that will allow them to get help in new ways. I wanted to mention that Bloomka, who is the manufacturer of the streetlights that were falling down, has sent out all the replacement parts, and they were scheduled to come this week, but I think it's been delayed. So they should be coming in the next week or so. They're going to supervise the replacement of the clips, the damaged clips, and then also the safety cables. And then they'll probably do a few installations with our team to make sure that everything is done in a way that's supported by the manufacturer and guarantees that we won't have any future issues. And then we will go hang the rest of those ornamental streetlights and replace the non-decorative ones that we have today. And then, of course, I'll let the public and the board know once that's done. I wanted to give a shout out to Pamela Cady, who works in our energy management division. She put together a great reference material called Solar in Concord that outlines the why and how of going solar. It's a conversation that they have, many times a day or many times a week with customers here in town who are curious about putting panels on their property. And I think that this really summarizes the majority of the questions that they get and walks people through the process a little bit. So hopefully this will be a good provider of information to those who are interested, and also help staff so that everybody who comes to them already kind of has this base level of understanding and will be more efficient in having their conversations. I also wanted to mention the Green Homes Tour that happened in March. There were 2 of them, and they had almost 100 people attend one or the other session, and those were really productive in demonstrating other residents' electrification in Concord and what they learned through the process and what they would have done differently, and then some of the successes that they've had. And I think it's just a great way to show people in the real world examples what this could look like to them. I wanted to mention that TRC has been hired to conduct a feasibility study on the landfill. They have a scope of work, and we expect deliverables from them in the next 6 weeks. And that will give us kind of an idea and a really rough cost as to what that racking system would look like on the slope of the landfill. So we are moving forward with that feasibility study. At the Solar Implementation Task Force meeting last Thursday, they did mention that we should not pursue feasibility study on the roof at CCHS because the financials were determined to be not productive enough to warrant that rooftop solar based on other in-town and out-of-town solar projects that have been done or would be possible. So we're holding off on that for now, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that meeting and the results later on in the agenda. I wanted to provide an update on the flow chargers at the Rideout, the level 3 chargers. If you'll recall, we have 2 of the same unit, but they have different face plates with different electronic mechanisms for people to interact. One unit has, like a tap to charge and only works with an app. And that unit does allow us to set the rates that the board voted for the time of use per kilowatt rate. The other unit with the credit card reader, which credit card readers are required per the grant because we need to allow people to use the system without a proprietary app. That unit does not allow the rates that the board voted. So we've been trying to reconcile this with Flow and Rexel, the reseller. we found a really good solution that we hope is one step in getting us to where we want to go. And that is that Flow makes a QR code sticker that we can stick on these units. And with that, by clicking on that, going to that website or taking a picture of that QR code, it brings them to a website where they can pay for a session without signing up for an app or any other service. So that satisfies the requirement of allowing sort of credit card payments, which means we can then move to immediately replace the hardware on that other unit, which would then allow them both to be in sync with the same rate structure that we like, that the board voted. The downside is that Rexel, the reseller, was not aware of the fact that you can replace that door. You have to replace the whole unit. But we have heard from E&E that other customers of Flow have replaced that component. So we're still optimistic that that's possible, and we'll pursue that aggressively and then provide an update when that happens. But for now, at least, we can have this grant requirement satisfied with the stickers, and then that, instead of having to wait perhaps until December when the grant window of a 1-year requirement ends, we would now be able to work to replace the hardware immediately. And then we also expect that those former Rideout level 2 chargers will be installed at the library parking lot in the next week or two. For the middle school solar, I wanted to give an update on that. The project is overwhelming and exciting and unlike anything we've ever done before. So there's a lot of interesting curveballs that were being thrown. The other stakeholders involved, the electrical contractors and the general contractor, are very interested in keeping on the schedule. And so we've been working with them and the planning committee and the middle school building committee to make sure that we get everything done that does not impact other steps and processes that are in place. So we brought on a part-time project manager, Mary Bolso, who has tons of experience with building projects, school projects, solar projects, and she's been a great resource so far. She's been attending those meetings to sort of absorb where we are and where we're going, and hopefully she can move into helping support us with our contact with vendors and getting those conversations moving. Where we were at was we had worked with PLM, one of our consultants, to essentially design the requirements based on the solar and the battery and everything else to design a switchboard. Now, PLM doesn't actually design the switchboard. They just give us the specifications for the switchboard. Then we go to a manufacturer or out to bid to get one. Because of the lead times for switchboards, the whole mechanism for procurement has changed, where if you just go out to bid, you could be looking at a many months delay because the manufacturers can be so specific with what they're going to give to you that whatever bid we issued, we might not get any responses, and that cycle might repeat for a few times. So what PLM recommended was that they reach out to some manufacturers that they've worked with and sort of get some traction there, and then we can find somebody that's in scope and hopefully lead to procurement that way. That was not working great either, and we do feel like we're on the path there, but we needed a solution that would allow the electrical contractors and the general contractors to keep moving in that area and make sure that they got the conduit stubbed out from the school, from the transformer, from all the canopies and the solar from the roof. And so Joe and his team have done a great job in designing a manhole system that would sit there and allow all the conduit to be tied into and be directly adjacent to the switchboard pad that we're going to be pouring and external structure for the switchboard. The electrical contractor signed off on this. The general contractor signed off on this. Everybody approves of the design, likes the design. It's something that our people are familiar with. So it's not going to be a one-off where if we have a line crew member who has to go do some work there, they're going to walk in and say, what is this? This doesn't look like anything we've worked with. So it was kind of a win in all directions. And we've also kind of taken any pressure off of CMLP so that they know what our plan is and they have everything they need to keep moving forward. So I'm really happy with where we are now. We knew that this was going to be a bumpy process, especially with the transition, because Dave had been the point of contact for all of the previous meetings and interactions. And so, but again, I think Joe and his team have done a fantastic job at getting us to a place where everybody is comfortable with the plan and that they're no longer waiting for us. And also, I'm attending the middle school building committee meeting tomorrow morning, and I'm on the agenda to give an update similar to the one I gave today, but to that group and allow them to ask questions. Regarding the AMS project, I'm pleased to report that we've got over 2,800 meters installed, residential meters installed, which is 40% of all of our residential meters. I've been tracking the sort of install rate, and if this rate were to continue, the sort of the worst case scenario would be mid-November that we'd be done with all the residential units. We are exploring alternative installation pathways, and also the staff are doing a great job at rolling with the punches in terms of adapting to issues that pop up. We've had some communication issues with meters that are installed indoors, closer to where Mary lives. We also have had some issues because, as you know, we have some meters that we do drive-by readings. We have some meters that are connected to the Eco1 smart grid old system, and now we have a third system. So doing the monthly billing has just become very difficult and cumbersome, but the staff are doing a great job at working with all the different stakeholders to make sure that everything is done correctly. But it's a lot of work, and it will be until we can, focus on just having a single vendor involved on that process. But I just want to thank them for their outstanding work. I'll also mention that as the weather gets nicer and more crews are available, we're hoping that, we might see a higher number per day. We're seeing anywhere on a good day, we're seeing anywhere between 30 and 85 meters installed, just depending on, is it an MDU with a lot of meters in one spot, or is it spread apart, and are there any issues that they encounter? I wanted to mention that we're working with Great Blue to conduct a customer service and satisfaction survey. We've done these in the past. We used to do them pretty regularly every other year or so, but since I believe 2017 or 2019, we haven't really done a comprehensive one. The pandemic kind of derailed things a bit. I thought that it was really important to do now at this transition point, just to get it kind of a snapshot in time, and also allow the permanent director with some kind of data and direction as to what they could do to improve. The nice thing about Great Blue is that they developed a meme standard, which is the Massachusetts Electrical Association, or Municipal Electric Association of Massachusetts. So basically all the MLPs in the state have worked together to create this standard survey. So by buying into that package, not only is it cheaper because we don't have to design the survey from the ground up, and it saves staff time because we don't have to be involved in some of those questions. And then finally, we get to benchmark ourselves against other MLPs, how we're doing. So we think that's going to be really valuable. Carol has been working with them and doing a great job at identifying and meeting with the senior leadership team and identifying our needs, because we can add a few extra questions, and also working with the vendors. And then that will go out probably in late April or May sometime, and then it'll be open for a few weeks. This is different than just posting a survey on a website, because they really do have a strict methodology to guarantee that they're going to get statistically significant data that's actionable and doesn't just represent the usual people who respond to surveys, which is, oh, I love it or I hate it. We really are going to try to get a good cross section of people, and they hound them. So, and then we should have the results probably in the summertime. And then I just wanted to follow up. I had a note to mention what Laura mentioned about the next meeting in April, but I also had one other thing, which was that at our last meeting, we brought up some salary information, and we talked about potentially discussing that in executive session as well. So we do feel like we'd be ready at that second April meeting to at least have a preliminary discussion with the board and give the board some data on what we're seeing with that. So, and that concludes my director's update. And then Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
That was a lot of things going on. Yeah, so it's interesting. The level 3, you're actually getting rid of the reader and putting on a QR code, and that seems to be the solution that we found. The consultant, Mary, is going to be a big help with the switchgear. I know that's something that really affects timelines, and a lot of people aren't thinking about because it's very wonky. Yeah, and the executive session, I think it is good that we add in the salaries there as well. Any questions from board members? Thank you. I see John has joined. John, you joined a little late, where you have to raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. We're going with that policy, so you may not be able to unmute yourself. And board members, feel free to leave yourself unmuted, and just try to control any background noise. That'd be great. As I cough into the microphone. All right. I don't see any waving hands or need to ask questions of Jason from Bianca or Warren. So I think we're ready to move on to the first agenda topic, which,
Broadband updates.
oh, sorry, broadband up. I don't have the agenda in front of me. I apologize. My kids, my wife is headed to New York and I had to get the kids out of the house and I jumped on minutes beforehand.
No problem.
All right. So broadband update, back to Jason. Thank you.
Yep, I'll keep this brief. I just have a few main topics. So I'm happy to report that we have hired a senior network engineer who will be starting on Tuesday, April 16th. That's just a few days away. This employee formerly worked for the town of Concord and CMLP and left a couple years ago, primarily due to commute distance, but was an absolutely terrific employee, and we're thrilled to have him back and the opportunity to have him back. We're not sure if this is going to be a long-term permanent solution, but at his level, he'll be able to train hopefully the second network engineer that we hire, and we'll take whatever resources that we can get so that we have people filling these roles. So I'm super excited. He's been a terrific employee and he's given a lot to the organization. So I'm glad that worked out. Dale, our broadband manager, has done some really terrific work with Jennifer Polito of the Concord Housing Authority and the Massachusetts Broadband Initiative, which is a state-funded group that's looking to expand access for broadband. Concord is often not eligible for some of the grants and funding because we don't qualify for sort of their definitions of urban or having certain lower income thresholds or not having access to any broadband. So we always pursue these, but then we end up getting turned away for one of those three reasons. But there is actually some money that the Mass Broadband Institute has for getting fiber into low income housing units. And Concord does have two of those properties within its bounds. And it does appear that they would be funding 100% of the cost to get fiber to an Ethernet to these buildings. And that would be great. It checks off a lot of boxes and a lot of goals that we have. It would get us into an MDU. It would get us access to low income housing units. It would get us access to more customers within Concord, and it's going to be funded by the state. So Dale's attended a lot of webinars, submitted a request for interest. He's obtaining quotes from third parties who are on the state contract. And what's nice about doing that is that it won't put any extra work on our line crews who are already kind of stretched pretty thin. So it's all coming together really nicely. I will mention just we're at the very beginning stages of this, but there are two low-income housing projects, each in Acton and Maynard, in places where our fiber could be extended to. So we're just looking at that and what the implications might be. One of them is down Great Road 2A, which we have water customers all along that area who all have water meters that can't be read because we have no infrastructure in Acton. And we also have the Nagog pump station, which is right at the end there. And so if we could get fiber down in that direction, it would help the town of Concord in many, many ways. And never mind the potential access to additional customers along that busy commercial route. So and then we've hired Scott Hopkinton to help us do some financial modeling. Scott was one of the person who put together the early financial models to justify the broadband request at town meeting and actually start this business. He's intimately aware of all the formulas used to calculate what the ROI would be and what it would take to invest in such a business. These models have been kind of left intact, but where we're at now is we're trying to do more capital planning and figure out how we can expand service within our territory. And we need better financial modeling. And so Scott's going to help us put some of that together, which was a goal of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. I'm excited about that. And then finally, I just want to mention we are rolling out the credit that was voted the last meeting for people who are currently eligible for the rate assistance program on the electric side, that they would get an automatic credit on their broadband as a result of the Affordable Connectivity Program going away. What we realized was that we might have missed some people when we crafted that vote and that credit because what we found is there are people who would be eligible for the rate assistance program on the electric side, but they don't pay their electric bill because their landlord is paying that and it's just included in their rent. So they would be eligible, but they're not. And the way that we worded it was that if they're in the rate assistance program for electric side, then they get this credit. So we're doing some analysis on that and figuring out, do we have customers that are in that category? And if so, we'll bring that to the board at a later meeting and present the option, and then maybe we can consider expanding that to those people. And that's all I had for my updates for broadband.
Would that need another vote from the board to expand the language to be not in the program, but eligible for the program?
Yeah, we think so.
Okay. Because I think I think the board would easily vote that in because that was the intent.
Right. Yeah. We don't know if there's any people that fall into that category. We just heard that there might be, and so we just were exploring that.
All right. Well, thank you for exploring those programs to connect low-income properties to the fiber, because that would be a big help for a lot of things. I think of, remote learning for the pandemic and how important that would have been. Well, great. Any questions from the board on broadband? Seeing none. I believe now we are ready to move on to the discussion of the special town meeting utility scale battery. Jason, do you want to take this, or how would you like to go? Who would you like to take it?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing that we could do is I could give an update on what's transpired, and then you could maybe lead a discussion with the board members on their thoughts on that, and then I can also share the motion and that's going to be on the special town meeting warrant, and then potentially take a position on it. So what we did. Is that
Sorry, and you're going to share the presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I can either give an overview just verbally, or if you want, I can share the presentation for the hearing isn't finalized yet, but the presentation that I gave the Solar Task Force is available if you want to see that.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to go through that presentation as well. We did put all the time on the agenda for this topic because I want to, make sure everybody's questions are answered. So I think that would be helpful to have some visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I share that, I want to give the history. So the select board voted on April 1st to open a warrant for a special town meeting to be held sort of within the annual town meeting timeframe on Wednesday, May 1st at 7:10 p.m. And the warrant window was only open until Friday at noon, and that was because if we had gotten a warrant article that would require a planning board hearing, the notification period for that is much longer. And if we had allowed the warrant to stay open into the next week, we wouldn't have had time to post that adequately. So it was only open for a short period of time. We worked with the Solar Task Force and gave a presentation that we're going to walk through in a minute. And the Solar Task Force voted unanimously to support that article. And then their plan is to not make a motion on their original Article 33 on the annual town meeting warrant. So I can share my screen now and walk through that presentation.
And the presentation is also available in the packet.
Yep. Swap. Sorry, I have too many screens. All right, Brian, can you see that?
I can.
Okay. So what we had before with Article 33 was, $9.2 million designated for solar expansion at the high school and at the landfill, along with a battery system to be installed at one of those locations, and control systems and any other associated engineering work and ancillary things related to those projects. Because we didn't have the feasibility done with either site, the Solar Task Force, at their hearing, at the FinCom hearing, they pared back their request and we're only looking for about $3 million, and that would be a battery and $100,000 for a feasibility for the control systems that would be used townwide for sort of a microgrid controller. What we were bound by, though, was that the original article specified the location at the high school and the landfill. And so the battery was going to have to be at one of those two locations. So in the map that you see here, you can see that Concord is roughly divided into two, with half of the town being served by one bus bar and the other town being served by the other bus bar, which sort of corresponds to one or the other main transformers that we have that receives the feed from Eversource. So everybody in town is on one or the other of these. It's not something that we can just pick up and move a bunch of people to one place or another, and that's because there are power protection devices all along the way that look for certain loads and power going in one direction, and when you move things around, you have to change all those things downstream. So it's not something where you can just, well, let's grab 500 customers and move them over here. It's a long process of analysis and engineering, and then changing all these devices, and then making the change, and that does usually impact service. So these are the two buses. And so what we realized was that, if you look at bus two is where we have the W.R. Grace solar site, which has 4.5 megawatts of solar, or I think it's 5.4 DC, 4.5 AC of solar. And that's also the bus bar where we have MCI Concord, which we know was just announced to be closing, and represents sort of in the shoulder months about 0.6 megawatts of steady usage, and might go up as high as 1 megawatt. So we knew that we had solar saturation issues that were much more severe on bus two, and the battery had to be installed on bus one, which was a problem. But our plan to deal with solar saturation long term was eventually batteries, eventually setting up the metering domain, which would allow us to go negative and push back to Eversource. But we also had to get SCADA done before that was possible, and that's a project just like AMS that takes a lot of time and planning. So, we were concerned, but we felt like we had a plan to address it. With MCI Concord closing, we were really worried we were getting into the danger zone. So if you look at the current solar that's on bus two, you can see that on a shoulder month when we're getting a lot of sun, very bright sunny day, but the temperatures are also very mild, so your electric load is going to be pretty low. We're hovering around 7 megawatts at peak in the midday. But when you look at our load on top of that, you see it obviously going inversely proportional to the solar increase there and dipping down. And now at the bottom of this wavy blue line, you see it's getting close to the sort of the 2 megawatt line. We're not just concerned about going negative. The relays that we use are electromechanical relays. They require a certain level of load for those relays to work properly, not just voltage or power factor, but load. These contacts are literally pieces of metal that are held apart, and they need to come together or pull apart, at certain times for certain functions. When we get down to about 1 megawatt, the response time of these metal contacts is much slower. And having a slow response time can lead to transformer explosions or other problems on the grid. So it's something that we worry about. And without a SCADA system, we don't see these curves in real time. We see them after the fact, when we pull data or if we're at the substation doing analysis. But, sitting in an office, we're not getting a warning, hey, you're getting to 1 megawatt. If a car hits a pole somewhere, it creates, a big problem. We're not going to know about it until we see the ripple effects of it. So added on here are a few extra lines. So the green line just shows that minimum load at that point in time. The blue line shows you if we did lose MCI Concord, where we would be, which is kind of 1 2/3, 1 3/4 megawatts at that period of time. And then the other line, the purple line, represents just one single solar project of people who've expressed interest that's on bus two, that if they got solar and removed their load from the system, of where we'd be, which is definitely in that sort of danger zone, very close to 1 megawatt. So and this is not the only solar project in town where people would like to build solar panels and add batteries. Now, we've been requiring people to add batteries so that they can absorb their own solar, it doesn't get worse, but it does mean that their load goes away, which still puts us in the danger zone. So them adding a battery might not make the problem get worse for their, for their solar coming onto our network. But so in other words, that orange line going higher, but it does mean that blue line, the dark blue line dropping even lower. And so we're at a point where it's just really hard for us to consider allowing future solar expansion, which is sort of antithetical to the town's goals. So for the MCI property, I mentioned the load. We know that it's closing on June 30th, but we do know that they share a wastewater treatment plant with the Northeast Correction Center, the farm across the street from CMLP, which is good. And, that means their load probably won't go to zero on June 30th, but we do expect that once the prisoners have been transferred and the workers have been all transferred away, that their load will drop pretty significantly. So we know that this clock is ticking, and regardless of even the prison and what happens there, we know that long term, the town is going to want to develop that area, and it will probably result in a lot more solar. And so even if it's heavily electrified, there may be times during these shoulder months where they're not really generating any load, unlike the MCI Concord property today. The solar growth that we've seen, and this is just rooftop, we're looking at small stuff. It went from 3.8 megawatts of solar in 2020 up to almost 5 megawatts in 2023. And, that's just the little, 10 kilowatt systems here and there adding up over time. And so we see this continue to grow. The Inflation Reduction Act is likely to also spur more solar development because there's such a large credit on solar and battery projects. So we're seeing people, getting really interested in pursuing that. The main solutions that are an option are curtailing the solar. Our current contract with W.R. Grace, with that site with Kearsarge, does not allow us to just say, hey, we're having a bad day, we'd like to turn off your solar. Not only do they get paid for the solar that they generate per our PPA, but they're also minting RECs that are very lucrative to them. And it's also contrary to our goals to just spend all this time to develop solar only to discharge it or get rid of it. The metering domain is definitely a possible solution. It is likely going to be cheaper than a big battery, though we don't really know the details because we're still trying to find out from a regulatory perspective what can Eversource require us to do for upgrades. We know certain parameters that we need to have in terms of SCADA at the substation, but we're just curious about a little bit more than that in terms of upgrades or equipment on their side or even at their Maynard substation, which is where our power comes from outside of Concord. And again, this metering domain is dependent on the SCADA system, which is not, gone out to bid yet. And hopefully later this summer, we're going to go out to bid, but the timeline on that is pretty unknown. So battery storage is an obvious option, but it's capital intensive. It does have a potential payback for peak shaving and frequency regulation, but that there's uncertainty around that. So what are other MLPs doing? Wellesley is about to go online in June with a 5 megawatt, 15 megawatt hour battery. Holyoke has been online with a couple of batteries, one sort of medium size and one pretty large. Groton's got two megawatt, 9 megawatt hour batteries coming online. Holden, Sterling, people are doing this. I will say the most common method is not MLP owned. It is actually outside financed batteries. Those other towns don't have quite the solar saturation that we have, and they're looking at this from just a peak shaving, revenue generation model. But we are hearing that people are starting to think about this and consider what might come down the road and how could these batteries be shifted to be used just for peak shaving and be turned more into dealing with this issue.
I think
the goal.
Sorry, Jason, your last comment was more about those contracts are focused on all the potential revenue sources and what these MLPs are coming back and saying after they've made these contracts is the resiliency for their distribution systems is a concern under this model.
Right. Yeah, I think Concord is ahead of the curve in terms of its electrification and solar development. And so we're experiencing this problem a little bit ahead of some of these MLPs, but they're starting to see it already. And they're realizing that where they once thought they had such healthy loads, they're not going to, they are seeing that they might have a problem down the road. I think Concord's different in that, our commercial and industrial are such a small part of our town, even though they're pretty big for our portfolio. Other towns and MLPs have much, much larger industrial capacities. And so they're less concerned about it in the long term because those loads aren't likely to going to be offset by solar. The goal is just to state this. The number one goal is to protect the distribution system and make sure that we can provide power reliably to all customers. Our next goal for any battery potential system would be to allow for the continued expansion of in-town solar. We know that this is identified in the Climate Action Plan. We know that this is a goal of the Solar Implementation Task Force, the Select Board, many Light Board members and the members of the public that want to see us continue to do what we can to allow for in-town solar to expand. And we really are at a point where doing more development of this is going to put our grid at risk. And then finally, save emissions and money by doing peak shaving or frequency oh my God, I just blanked on it, but
Regulation.
regulation. Thank you. Frequency regulation. I just kept imagining FR. So we are, this is obviously a potential to pay back that heavy investment for the battery, but it's our third goal. And, we were concerned very early on when we approached third parties about developing a battery that if we wanted to work collaboratively with them and have them put up the capital, that their priorities would sort of be reversed. Obviously, they don't care anything about number two. They care about number three first, and then yeah, they're fine with number two, but that's only after they've already gotten their money out of the battery. I probably don't need to spend too much time on this, but when you talk about a battery, you talk about both the power and energy capacity. The power is what we demonstrate in megawatts. The energy is megawatt hours. That's how much total storage the battery is going to hold. Megawatts is what are the inverters rated to provide that certain level of power. The energy is actually the more expensive thing. The inverters, once you size those, it's really about how many battery banks do you have after that. But the energy is what really allows the grid stability, allows you to absorb that solar for a longer period of time. It also allows you to be more sure that you're going to be able to hit a peak. If you have a battery that's only capable of discharging for 2 hours, you're going to have to be a lot more precise than if you have a battery that can discharge for 4 hours if you're trying to hit a peak. When you look at the sort of the pros and cons of each one, a smaller battery does better manage the technology investment risk. And also, if you look at a bang per buck per megawatt, then a medium-sized battery is going to be kind of the perfect target because you're going to get the most money based on your investment. Not the most money total, but the most money per megawatt per dollar you spend back. You're also going to obviously have a lower initial capital cost. So for all the reasons I mentioned before about being able to better hit the peaks, managing solar saturation, you're going to get more money in the long run. And, we have a goal in our climate action plan to hit 20 megawatts or 60 megawatt hours of storage. And we really have nothing on the books. The middle school solar will be the first large battery that we have in town, and that's a 2x4. So, we're 4 megawatts into the 60. So a bigger battery definitely gets us more progress there. And then there's some economies of scale that you save money on because you're doing one project for a much larger size. And then with money on the table, we are going to get a bigger credit. So, less direct cost to us. So here's some projected financials of the batteries. The orange line on this chart represents the current kind of expectations of the battery at the middle school size. The 3.9 or just about 4 by 7.5, 7.7 is kind of a mid-range, kind of the 2 megapack battery size if you're looking at the Tesla model. And then the last one is the just under 5 and just under 15 megawatt hours battery and what they would cost sort of upfront. If you'll see the energy storage system, that's the battery itself, and then all the ancillary costs that go along with developing it. Some of these are one-time costs, like the battery itself, the engineering, the shipping, but then others are ongoing costs like the insurance and the managed services, where we would have somebody like E&E manage the battery and try to hit those peaks. There would be, regardless of whatever project we go with, we know there is going to be a battery control system. And while we don't have SCADA today and our advanced metering isn't fully complete, we will be setting this up in such a way that the more data we get, the more real-time information it can have and factor into dispatching power. It was kind of the situation where we imagine it would be set automatically to do something, but we would be able to intervene if we forecast a really cloudy day or there's some unusual event is happening. We expect a much higher or lower load than normal. And that's something that we do every day already. Laura or somebody she designates is going in every day for load control and making sure that everything is set up correctly. So we're pretty confident that with what the capabilities we have today and using a third party, we'd be able to do a pretty good job at managing this until we did have a really robust SCADA system and microgrid controller to handle all of the inputs with the load, the solar, the battery capacity. You'll see here that a 20-year NPV is looking at about $7.5 million for the big battery, about $5 million for the mid-sized battery, and just under $2 million for the small battery. The next slide shows what the projected impact would be on ratepayers. And the good news is, with the exception of that very first year and the very big battery, every other year is going to be a savings for ratepayers, and that jumps obviously once the capital is paid off. This does go out 20 years. We are hearing of 15 and 20-year guarantees on batteries. They are, replacing cells as needed. One battery company we talked to recently has said that they're finding that battery degradation is actually much lower than they anticipated, which is good news. We are seeing the lithium iron phosphate chemistry at being much better and having more cycles than the traditional NMC or lithium ion batteries. So that's good. And then you'll see here how the IRA credit is nearly double. It doesn't appear nearly double because it's just rounding. This one's rounded up and this one's rounded down just because of the numbers, but they are just about the same, just doubled for the bigger battery. Oh, and the last thing I'll mention is that this was assuming a 3.4 interest rate, and we did talk to the CFO. He's thinking to be super conservative, be 4% for borrowing, but we, we're hearing of 3.5 is kind of approximate.
You should show the next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are all the other assumptions that are built into the those numbers that you saw. That is, when we take that credit we're going to get essentially right after the first year, we're going to apply that to the capital or to the balance, and then we replace the inverter in year 10, and then we have that annual fee for battery dispatch, and then 2% escalator for O&M, and then market price, battery degradation, discount rate. So again, any of these things, if they're tweaked, they'll result in a different model. Like if battery degradation is only 1% or lower, obviously we'd see a higher return. If electricity market prices change in a way that is not anticipated, that would change. And then any of these other costs. So we did use sort of the best data that we had at the time, and I think some people have weighed in on it. The alternatives that we've explored are curtailment, finding a system to get rid of that electricity. Either we can't do it because of our contract by having them power down their inverters, or it could be illegal or unsafe depending on how we try to accomplish that. We have and do tie bus bars together, which would result in essentially all the town having a single point of failure. It's not ideal. It has to be done very sparingly and has to be monitored while it's being done because of some frequency harmonics that can happen and just result in a really bad situation. So we wouldn't really want to do this if we thought we were going to have 3 really sunny days in April. We wouldn't want to tie the buses together for 3 days. That could really result in a bad situation. So we do that when Eversource notifies us of maintenance or emergency work on one of their feeders, but really that's the only time that we consider doing that. Third-party battery construction, and I do have an update on this. Typically, as I talked about, their priorities are the peak shaving and the frequency regulation, not so much protecting the integrity of the grid. And so those models haven't really been worked out before. We did have a conversation with a company that is building one of those other MLP batteries, and it was actually a really good conversation. And they admitted this is not something that they've really considered or worked on, but they're actually interested in seeing if they could come up with a model that would work. So we are giving them some additional data, and then we'll just kind of see, you know, napkin math. Is this something that we think we could guarantee the usage that we need out of it? And then they could, you know, figure out what revenue situation would work. We'd obviously be paying to use the battery, you know, because it wouldn't be owned by us, but we're definitely open to getting as much information on that plan as possible so that we can present that to the board. What we would like to do is, you know, pursue this warrant article, get the borrowing authorization, but continue to do our homework on every alternative that's possible, and then present those options to the board and say, you know, here's the benefit of this model, here's the benefit of that model, here's the risks in this model, here's the risks in that model, and then, you know, let the board sort of weigh in on their thoughts, and then, you know, consult with the town manager and figure out the best plan to move forward. Another option that was floated was adding load. Now, load would help. One option that Bianca found, which is terrific, and I'm super excited about it, it was, you know, using excess solar electricity to generate clean hydrogen. And then that could be marketed as, you know, excess solar generated clean hydrogen. And I do think that there's a possibility for that. I think the problem, and what this means by is, can load be guaranteed? So I think from the hydrogen production standpoint, they could, you know, ramp up and do what's needed. But what I was referring to here by load is, can the solar load be guaranteed? Because it may fluctuate a lot between when we have excess solar and when we don't, and when we're in danger zone and when we're not. And having to guarantee and come up with an arrangement where, you know, providing something at a certain rate, or we're providing excess and we have to deliver on something, we just want to make sure that that is not going to impede our number one goal, which was the integrity of the grid. And but it's definitely an option. That would be a wonderful use of excess solar that we ever had. If we don't have a battery and we can't store it to use later, you know, I still think we have the goals of battery, both for the emissions, you know, savings for the entire grid, and the state of Massachusetts has the same goals for energy storage. Yeah, I see Bianca has her hand up, and that's pretty much the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing, and Brian, I'll unmute Bianca, and feel free to facilitate a discussion.
Sure. Bianca, please go right ahead.
I was just going to jump in where Jason left off about guaranteeing the load, and that is precisely what a green hydrogen agreement would be, and that's something that I did talk to Zach Green about. So green hydrogen is not a big thing in the U.S. yet. It is legally, it does have legal definitions in the European Union, and actually last May, I was asked to co-host a roundtable discussion on renewable energy with the Secretary of Environment for the state of Sao Paulo, along with the governors of 2 states that were overproducing solar. And the discussion was around green hydrogen. And as a result of, and this is last year when this topic was hot, and they were making agreements with the EU. They now have agreements with the EU. Plug Power happens to be one of the companies that is producing that green hydrogen in the southern part of Brazil and selling it to Germany. And that was one of the emails that I forwarded to you guys from Zach. In my discussions with Zach, you know, so just to be clear, the Plug Power here in Concord, they're just a research and development facility, right? They're part of a much larger company. The research and development is housed here in Concord. But they are certainly familiar with producing green hydrogen along with, you know, according to the legal standards of the European Union, and having it shipped. Here in the US, there's no legal standards, so everything is a lot more loosey-goosey. And of course, you know, we talked about it. I said, would it be possible for the CMLP to control when power is dispatched to one of your electrolyzers? And of course, that's possible. You know, and that would be effectively how green hydrogen would be generated. So the question is, you know, whether CMLP has the capacity to dispatch load at a particular time, and whether, you know, there would be that control. I'm assuming the same thing would be for batteries, right? You have to be able to control when the battery absorbs the load or not.
So Bianca, I don't want to get distracted into a hydrogen discussion. This facility would add load, which would reduce our need for this battery system if we can make sure that load hits when solar production is high.
Correct.
So I just want to go back to the battery system and off of hydrogen, because it's an example of load. You could have an ice rink chilling, creating load. You could have a whole bunch of large customers.
No, and this is why I think that there's a misconception here, and this is related to the battery. The hydrogen is not an energy source. Hydrogen is primarily a energy storage solution, and it competes directly with lithium-ion batteries. So this is an alternate that I think has not been considered, and this is why I'm bringing it up.
Okay, so you're talking about hydrogen as an alternative to utility scale batteries,
Correct.
lithium ion or lithium phosphate. Okay.
Correct.
Do you think that their solution could meet our timelines of up and running within less than a year?
I think it's worth a conversation, right? I opened that door and Zach was this is what they do, right?
Okay.
They came to Concord because of our speed of doing things. They are on a fast timeline. So I think it's worth a conversation.
Okay, I'm not opposed to the conversation. Do you mind unmuting Warren so he can ask a question?
Thank you.
Yep, go right ahead.
I want to get into a question about battery size, but I do want to comment. I'm extremely dubious about pursuing hydrogen for this particular solution. I applaud Bianca for looking into it. It may be a direction we want to go, but it's premature to try to do something that would be in place within 12 months. The technology is really at a very early stage, and an organization like CMLP does not have the in-house expertise to move into a completely different business than the electricity business. So I personally would be very dubious about that for this project, but we should keep looking into it because it could have a good role in the future as we move forward. But the thing I wanted to, sorry.
I was just to clarify, we wouldn't be moving into the hydrogen business. Plug Power does hydrogen. What they would be able to do is produce their own hydrogen and label it as green. So they would be able to achieve a green label if we can certify that we only supplied that production with excess solar.
But then that poses its own issues too, because they can't guarantee that they have markets for that hydrogen, that they'll be able to ensure that they'll be up in place and each and every day have a need for that hydrogen and be able to keep that system online. It's just in its early stage.
Yeah, so
in my view,
agree. Sorry, I'm going to just interrupt for a quick second. So I agree with Warren that we need to go with something that other MLPs are already doing because of our timeline. It doesn't mean that we can't look at hydrogen or look at flywheels in the future for scaling up these kinds of solutions. But I think we got to limit our discussion to, are we going to do a third-party contract? Are we going to do a small battery? Are we going to do a large battery? I want to keep because we only have today to come to a consensus, and I don't want to be left with more questions at the end of our conversation.
Sorry, the other thing I would say related to that, and I want to get to the issue of battery size here, is given the town meeting and the town meeting warrant, we have to be considering a proposal that fits in the four corners of that warrant item, which has to do with batteries. But what I want to ask is, given the hope that the metering domain will be in place within 2 years. Does that make a difference in terms of which size battery is the most appropriate one for us to be recommending?
Uh,
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
do you want to take it, Jason?
I mean, you can start and I'll weigh
Sure.
in.
So Warren, my view is yes, partially. The metering domain is going to basically give us megawatt hours. That if you look at, you know, our ability to absorb power, the metering domain is going to be great for solar expansion and megawatt hours. But when you look at hitting the peaks, that 5 and 15 gives you a 3-hour duration at the maximum megawatts to reduce the peak. Because we can't go, it's actually going to be a 4.99 instead of a 5, because we get a new review by ISO if we do a larger inverter. And so maximizing that 5 megawatt peak shaving and that 15 megawatts for a 3-hour duration to increase the accuracy of hitting the peak is the sweet spot, because it goes up against the limit that brings us the most financial bang for our buck and gives us that accuracy. And when we add metering domain to that, we can then add a lot more solar and utilize that 5 megawatt discharge over a longer period of time, because we've essentially added megawatt hours. So that's why I think so. That's the partial yes, is metering domain will give us megawatt hours, but it won't give us more accuracy into the peaks. It won't affect our peak return. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but
Can
so Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the metering domain is going to allow us to push power in those really high solar peaks. But remember, everybody else is going to be generating a ton of solar power at that time. So the power that we push back on the metering domain, we're probably going to have to pay for them to take that power at that time because of how the market works. So it really should be used very sparingly, at least in that configuration. And you know, if our goal was 60 megawatt hours by 2030, it's 2024 now, mid 2024. If we want to get to that goal, and remember the state has a goal too, because they know that more batteries equals fewer peaker plants running, which is the dirtiest power that we generate. So the more battery we have, it's going to add resilience. It's going to be able to absorb solar. It's going to keep solar in town. And it just achieves a lot of the goals. It's kind of why the Solar Task Force thought the battery was still worth pursuing even when the solar fell apart, because they recognized its place in allowing future solar development. So I feel like and remember, the metering domain is capped at 5 megawatts. We're never going to be able to push more than that. And so if we do continue to expand solar in town, we may, you know, have threshold issues there where the battery, we can build as many batteries as we want. We just can't exceed 5 per one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Do you mind unmuting John and he can ask his question? John, go ahead.
Yeah, apologies in terms of having some internet issues, so not able to join in the way I'd like. But and I did review the spreadsheet that I think Laura had put together. And thinking about this further, when we were talking about state policies, there is a state policy, the Clean Peak standard, which represents a potential revenue source, which would, I think, probably further strengthen the economics of the longer duration battery. Is that something that we considered? And could that potentially further enhance the economics?
I have not looked at the value the Clean Peak program could bring to us. Laura or Jason, have you had an opportunity?
I have not looked at that program, but what we did find when we talked to the other battery companies, they anticipated doing a lot of peak shaving with their battery and, you know, basically doing a cycle per day. They're doing about 640 cycles per year, and they're using it way more for frequency regulation than they are for peak shaving. And it's been very lucrative to do that. So I think one of the long-term concerns with the peak shaving game is that how do we know it's going to be as lucrative in 5 years or 10 years as it is today? That's definitely a fair point, because as more people add batteries to the grid, peaks are going to be harder to hit. It might be less of a peak and more of a mound. So that is a little bit of unknown. But what is known is that the whole ISO has peak times, and having batteries that can be dispatched during those times can be very lucrative, and probably will be, and it will avoid those peaker plants that take a little while to spin up. And these can kick on immediately. And so having that capacity available can be very lucrative. But I haven't looked into that. Laura, have you looked into that program for the state?
So I don't know enough, honestly, John, about the Clean Peak Standard rules and requirements. We didn't include it in this financial analysis. I have some questions about whether it would apply to us. Some of the state programs end up not being accessible to us because we're a nested utility, behind Eversource. So we would just need to look at that. But if there's another way to add a revenue stream, we can certainly look at enhancing it. We did update the model since the Solar Task Force meeting to increase the borrowing rate to the 4% that Mr. Ansaldi recommended. It does lower the NPVs a little bit. While we're talking about economics, I would just like to mention, while these show very positive NPVs, like you're going to make a ton of money with these batteries, there is a lot of uncertainty in the future about whether the rules that apply today will continue to apply, and that the way that the ISO allocates costs will continue to be the same. If you're going to plunk $10 million down today, the model shows us earning back about $1 million to $1 a year. So that would take roughly 10 years, right, to pay that back. Well, what if you don't continue to make $1 million a year? What if they change the rules and it only becomes 500 or 200? Or, that's what folks are concerned about by investing in a big battery. And then it looks like it's going to be a good deal, but what if the rug gets pulled out from under you and you invested this money and it doesn't? So, I guess the way I would think about it is, don't think of the batteries as a big money maker, but let's think of it as maybe we could break even at least, and then it's still a good deal because we need it for the distribution system.
Any other board questions? I don't see any.
Would you like me to share the motion that was,
Yes,
not the
please.
motion, rather the article that was put on the special town meeting warrant?
Yep. So Sam, we usually do public comments at the end, but we only have this one topic. So once the board finishes discussions, we'll go back to you.
So the language of the article is very similar to what the Solar Task Force had been moving in Article 33. We removed the location requirements. We removed the word solar to just refer to a battery, and the sum is not to exceed 10.4 million. Again, our plan is to get as much information as possible on every option that's reasonable while we pursue this, to present something before the board. So this is a borrowing authorization. This does not mean that we're spending 10.4 million or that we're borrowing 10.4 million. It just means that we're authorized to. And it does include some of the same ancillary services that were in the original Article 33, like permitting, construction, installation, bid preparation, construction services, control systems, et cetera.
Bianca, you have a question?
Yeah, so in terms of, I understand, or what I've understood is that this is a request to borrow, but it does not compel us to use these funds or to borrow the full limit. Now, so my two questions are, outside of town meeting, would CMLP have the authorization to request borrowing, or must it always go through town meeting? And number two is, have we ever had any borrowing? Have we ever requested borrowing that we have not fully used?
So yes, it always requires us to go to town meeting, and yes, we have borrowed money that we have not fully used, but that's not to say we're not going to. The advanced metering was 3 million or a little over 3 million, and that has not all been borrowed yet. And, you know, there was always a debate as to how much of that would be borrowed versus how much would be spent. But I believe Matt is working with Anthony and the town to figure out the first tranche of borrowing for that project. But the total costs on that project are still to be determined because we haven't even got to the commercial installation yet. And, you know, we're trying to ramp up for crews of installation now. So it's uncertain yet, but I know we haven't borrowed every dollar of that yet.
And Bianca, you did bring up the important point, which is that this is an authorization to borrow for the use of a battery. It is not compelling us to do so. So if we found that a third-party partnership, the priorities were aligned and that they could put up their capital to do the system, then there would be little hesitation to move forward with that. If we found that our view of the market changed and the risk was higher than originally anticipated, we could reduce the size of the battery system accordingly. But this is something that we need to have the town allow us to have the option to borrow to do what we think is needed today. And then as we go through the bid process and as we explore actual real numbers, we can do what we feel is right for ratepayers.
So just to clarify another point. So let's say we get this authorization for 10 million and we start doing some due diligence, and it happens to be that, you know, Plug Power is super psyched about trying to do a green hydrogen partnership with CMLP.
I think what you're coming down to is the wording of grid scale battery storage.
Right.
This has already been submitted, and this is the language on the special warrant. At this point, it would require a change in the motion, and it would require the moderator to agree that the change from battery to energy, to say energy storage system, is that expansive. And that was the problem we had with the last article. The last article was at the landfill, and we wanted to simply change the location. And she said that expanded the intent of the article. And that is why we couldn't use that modification. So I don't think we can change the word battery to energy. But I get your point. Could you consider the hydrogen system a battery? It's language, it's interpretation.
Yeah,
Again,
and my concern is like if let's say if it in the process of our due diligence, and this is, I'm not saying I'm not hydrogen. I have no, I have no horse in this race for hydrogen, but it's an option that I think is worth considering. It's worth the minimum a conversation.
I totally agree. We can look at that, but I think for our first energy, the middle school is going to have a lithium phosphate. This project really should use the most abundant technology because we are entering we're adding a new function of storing electricity. That's no small feat, and I don't want us to be on the bleeding edge of a project with our first attempt. A second, okay, we can explore that, but I really don't want us to be, this is new. I want to go with the most robust energy storage solution that's commercialized the most.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean,
Okay.
Well, okay.
I understand, and if we were still talking about the draft, I'd have no trouble changing the word battery to energy. but I think we just missed it on Friday. Other thoughts from the board? Is there anything else you want to share, Jason?
No, just, to your point that we have done and will continue to do everything we can to explore all the options, to put everything in front of the board to say, this option will result in this option will result in that. Here's the best guess. Here's the real world data. We'll tap every resource we have to get all that information. And then, like you said, we'll present an option. And if it's borrowing, we'll borrow. If it's not, we won't. If there's a better option that's hiding somewhere, we'll find it. So what we don't want is to lose a whole year in this process. If we find in 3 or 4 months that this is the best option, we've got traction, we have a location, and this is the best bet, then we have at least an avenue. But if we have a better solution or a different mechanism, then at least we have this on the back burner as an option.
Yeah, and if MCI had closed before the warrant closed, we would have this on the standard warrant. We've been riding this solar saturation since 2017 and been able to manage these low load events. The loss of MCI load is what was the tipping point to need immediate action versus waiting for metering domain or other solutions to come to fruition. Warren, you have a thought?
Yeah, I had a question based on Jason's last comment. From the slides you showed previously and from your explanation, it seemed like this wasn't just something we were getting authorization in case we needed it. It's made it sound like, from a risk standpoint to the town, this was a fairly urgent problem that we definitely should be taking action on. What you just said now made it characterize it a little differently. Which one is it?
So it's definitely an urgent issue that we need to take care of. I think for me, the question is the mechanism that we go with. We've always wanted to make sure that we protect the integrity of the grid. If we can do that with a different mechanism, then we're open to it. But all of our real world data, example contracts, and conversations with people did not seem to suggest that we'd be able to reconcile our needs with a third party's need to make money. And so that's why we were led down this path. But we continue to pursue those conversations with new parties, and they're going to look into it to see if it's something that's possible.
Okay,
but
thank
that's
you.
a small chance, but still an option. And we want to make sure that we can say with 100% certainty that this is the best option.
Thank you.
All right. So I think, Jason, if you feel you've shared all the information you'd like to, and I think the board has asked their questions, I would like to entertain questions from any participants on the call. Oh, we got 3 right away. Well, I see John has got his, so John has his hand raised, so I'm going to go to John Dalton.
Jason or Brian, could you just clarify the intent of this vote? So is the purpose here, the Light Board is going to be making a vote, which will be the results of which will be shared at town meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the wording, the language that you see in the screen. We're going to be voting in support or not in support of it, and any clarifying statements that we feel we need.
So it would be helpful if we think that this is important to speak with one voice if possible.
Yes, yes. I think it would be very important to many other participants of town meeting, whether it be committees or people just coming to vote. They would like to know where the board stands on this article.
And we will be having a finance public hearing on the 16th of April at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
to discuss this, since it's a borrowing article.
All right. The order on my screen is Carlin, Sam, Mary, Pamela, and Dean. I'm going to go with Carlin first. Carlin Reed.
Thank you. I'm hoping you folks can hear me now. It's Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End.
Yep.
Yep.
Just a quick reminder, because of Zoom bombing, when you raise your hand, Jason will unmute you. You don't have the function to unmute.
That's great. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, so I'm looking forward to the April 16th hearing, but I'm speaking on my own behalf today. The question I have is about the wording of the article. Can you explain to me briefly the mechanism by which the select board will be involved in the timing on making your decisions about whether to do this borrowing authorization? Because it says the town will authorize the town treasurer with the approval of the select board, not the light board, but the select board to borrow. How does that work?
No, I thought that was pretty standard language for borrowing, because, I don't know, and Carrie still on the call? I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, but that was the wording used for the solar middle school project, the solar, task force article. I don't know if Carrie can weigh in, but
Well, that's fine. If that's the standard way of doing it, that's the standard way of doing it. It just seems a little odd that it sounds like the select board has the control.
no,
over
they have
what
to,
happens.
approve the issuance of debt, and that's what it comes down to, and why it talks about the town and why we have to go to town meeting in the first place.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got an email with other votes relating to solar, and the selectmen and the select board are commonly referenced. So I don't know exactly, but I believe that's the way the language should be written.
Yeah.
All right, Sam Lines on the iPhone.
Hey, folks. Yeah, thanks, Sam Lyons, 137 Fairhaven. Just a couple of notes based on my experience doing this stuff on some of the questions that were asked. On Clean Peak, the municipal systems are not eligible for Clean Peak, unfortunately. It can be actually quite a lucrative program, but yeah, municipal systems are not eligible. And then I guess I would just be wary of anyone relying too heavily on frequency regulation revenues in the long term. That ancillary service is very likely to drastically drop in price and basically become equal to spinning reserves in the near future as some of the big batteries get installed in Massachusetts. Although capacity revenues should rise over time, given some of the dynamics on the system here. So just based on my experience, as we're looking at the numbers there. And then I think I'm also just curious how the town is intending to use the tax credit. Is that going to be bringing in a tax equity investor if we own the system? You know, I think traditionally the tax credits have only been able to been used by developers, which is why the developers have typically owned these systems. And then just reminding us that there's also brownfield credits that can increase the value of that as we're thinking about the siting of the battery system. So just a couple of notes there based on some of my experience as we move forward with it.
Great, thank you, Sam, for the clarification on the Clean Peaks, and others. Laura, you wanted to build on Sam's comment?
Yes, please. I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware we did not include any revenue from frequency regulation in the financial model. So we agree with you, Sam, and there's no assumption of any revenue coming from that stream.
Great.
And I can answer Sam's question on the tax credits. I was
yeah.
in the APPA conference, and basically the result is that, yeah, the MLPs, we don't qualify because we're in this gray zone of taxation, but we get a 15% reduction in the value of the credit, but we do receive the IRA benefit.
Yeah, and that works out to 25.5% as a reduction in cost instead of the full 30 for.
Yeah, and so the other thing we should mention is that CMLP is in the process of hiring basically a tax equity and Inflation Reduction Act tax credit maximization firm to help us with this, to make sure that when we craft the RFPs for equipment, let's say at the middle school, that we are including all of the requirements that the IRS is going to place upon us for proving that we've done certain things such as domestic content, prevailing wage, so that we can claim the full credit. So we're going to get some expert help on that.
And in the presentation, it said the IRA credit was 1.4 for the 4 megawatt, 7.7 megawatt system. And then for the 5 and 15, the IRA credit was 2.6 million. So those estimates are in there, Sam. All right. I'm going to go on to Mary. Mary, would you like to make a comment? Mary Hartman.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I just got unmuted. First of all, I'd like to respond to Carlin Reed's question. And yes, the select board does have the authority to approve any bond issuance, but we do it as a matter of trust with the town manager. So we go by the advice of the town manager and our CFO. So it's pretty much a perfunctory performance of the select board. I do have two questions. One is, I think that at town meeting, I would imagine that people at town meeting are going to want to know the effect of this on their rates. You've given the NPV calculations. It shows that we go positive pretty quickly, but as far as what potential rate impact on rates is, I think is important. I know there's a lot of variables as far as how much will we borrow, when will we spend this money, but some estimate on the impact of rates is going to be, I'm pretty sure that question will be asked. So you might want to anticipate that. And then the other question I have is, as far as the IRA credits, are these numbers net of what we're expecting from those credits, or how is that reflected in this particular article?
Jason, do you mind sharing that slide on presentation?
Yep, I will present from here. Let me just share the right screen.
And Laura, do you want to take this? Or do you want me to take it?
Hold on, I gotta unmute her. So
Oh.
I can only do one thing at a time. So hold on one second.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Laura and the board, you can stay unmuted just to make conversation easier.
Jason, I know that's untrue. You can do many things at once.
He does every day.
Because he does it every day. That's exactly right.
So this slide does show, Mary, the impact on the average customer bill that uses 883 kilowatt hours a month. So you'll see here in the lower half of those orange bars where it says monthly bill increase. So, year two on the big battery, you're looking at a maybe $1.25 reduction in your bill, which I think is important to understand that as load decreases by things like MCI Concord closing, those fixed costs have to be shared over fewer people, and that's going to result in slightly higher bills. So this credit, I think, would be a real benefit to people. And even if these numbers are off wildly, it should still be a very negative impact on the bill. But Laura, did you want to add something else?
I think negative impact on the bill could be misinterpreted. It's going to be bill savings.
Drop your bill. It will drop your bill.
Yeah, Mary asked specifically about how the tax credit is modeled in this financial analysis. And basically what we've done, Mary, is borrowed the full capital cost in year one.
Yep.
So we have some fairly high interest costs year one. And then when we get the tax credit 18 months later, we use that to reduce the balance in the bond. I mean, basically it would be done in like an anticipatory note for the year one. And then the actual bonding would be at the lower capital cost because you would take the IRA credit and offset your capital needs. So you're borrowing less money.
So let me just be clear. So we're anticipating that we're going to borrow some portion of that 10.4 million. But some of that borrowing will in fact be netted to a lower amount in 2 years.
So we borrow. Sorry, go ahead.
Is the 10.4 net after we reduce the balance, or is 10.4 all in at the beginning?
10.4 is all in at the beginning. We haven't taken the IRA credit out yet.
Okay, so the two good news things I just heard here is that there's going to be a very minimal impact on rates at the beginning, and there's a potential of having some net savings to our bills going forward. I think that's an important point to make.
Yes.
And I now understand the IRA credit. So thank you.
Yeah, so if you look at the slide that's being shared now on the right, you can see that little increase in 2025. That's before we get the rebate, and then 2026 we've received the rebate.
Yeah,
And
I understand,
Okay.
Brian. There's a lot of information that we're expecting people
Yeah.
correct.
at town meeting to absorb.
Yeah.
And I think people go right to their rates
Yeah.
often. So
Absolutely.
this
This
is
is
something you
yeah.
want to emphasize. That's my recommendation.
And this slide will be updated with the 4% rate. Is that correct? And we'll look at the other assumptions based on our conversations through the Solar Task Force and this meeting, such that the hearing has the latest and
Great.
greatest versions of the model.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else want to build on a previous question? I don't see anyone waving hands, so I am going to go to
Hey, Brian, I had
Warren.
my
Yeah.
hand. I wanted to build on what Mary was saying. I think this needs to be expressed explicitly at town hall. We're putting something on the table here that is designed not only to increase the stability of our electricity system, but is designed to reduce rates.
Right.
And we should say that like in the first sentence.
Yeah, yes, I agree, but stability first.
Yes.
And then very shortly after, it saves money.
So I just on that thing about this, the saving on the rates, and I think Laura mentioned this, and I want to make sure that we fully understand, or that that we fully understand that there's risks around that, right? Because
Mhm.
the savings would come if we're able to do some peak shaving, which is how the distribution and transmission costs get allocated to us, which are large. In my conversation with Laura, I think it was something like $6 million a year that we're charged for distribution and transmission. And if we can have that or eliminate that or whatever, this would be some serious savings to the consumer. However, they can play tricks on us. They can decide, well, that's not how we're going to price things anymore. So we're sticking it to you, and the savings you thought you're going to get isn't going to come to fruition. And they can do that at any time without any prior warning.
If we had a time traveler, they would play in the energy markets and make millions because no one knows the future. And that's what what this discussion is for, is to make the best plan based on what we know, and to not overextend ourselves to get too much risk. All right, so I see John raised his hand, so I'm going to go to John because he's a board member, but then I'm getting to Pamela Dritt is next. John?
Yeah, I just want to be clear in terms of the rate making process and the framework that's used by ISO New England. You know, there's a lot of stakeholder input that goes into any changes to how peak load cost responsibility would be assessed to customers. It needs to be approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission first. So there, you know, things do change and there is uncertainty here, but there really is not an opportunity for the people who are going to be charging us for the costs associated with transmission and peak to kind of play games. So I just think we need to be clear there that there's really not a gaming opportunity here.
Yeah, there's no one's going to really pull the rug out of under this without a lot of heads up and a lot of debate and a lot of regulatory scrutiny.
So just to clarify, so John, do you think that that's a very small risk? Like it takes years in order to change that pricing mechanism? Or just, I want to get it, you know, is it something that would, you know, yeah, does it take years to change it? Or could they change it in the next 12 months to 24 months?
They could change it in the next 12 to 24 months, but if it's going to be done, it has to be done with a strong rationale, right? There would have to be a vote at ISO New England, and there's all kinds of different stakeholders that would participate in that vote. And then a filing would have to be made in front of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who would evaluate whether the proposal, is going to result in, just and reasonable rates. So there's quite a few protections there. Things can change, and I think, frankly, one of the strengths of the proposal that's being put forward, the larger battery with greater energy capability, is that it's going to be a more economically resilient solution because it has greater energy storage capability. So it's going to be able to address the uncertainties that you were raising beyond in terms of when the peak period is going to be, because we're going to have 3 hours of storage, not 2 or 1.
Okay. Okay, so you would classify the changing in the rates, is it like, if I would put it on a percentage scale, like maybe like a 10% risk or something like that? I don't want to
The
put
risk
numbers
will
on it, I
increase.
just want to like, how, like small, it seems like it would be maybe smaller than I was considering.
I think, the risk will increase over time, but I think that, for the near term, 10% is probably not unreasonable.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to go on to Pamela Dritt.
Thank you. Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. This is so exciting. Thanks for putting the meeting materials online. I really appreciate that. I love Bianca's idea of investigating clean hydrogen production as an energy storage. We should also investigate the cost of doing liquefaction of air as energy storage too. The advantage of those are that we don't have limits on how much time we can feed it back in. It is essentially variable storage whenever we need, and we can keep doing it, and then we can pump it back in for hours and hours and hours, days, without any problem. What you can't do quite with batteries yet. And with excess storage capacity, wouldn't we be able to balance the grid by charging them during low load times, essentially behind the meter town wide? And that would allow us to shave the peak and increase the load at the same time.
Yep.
And
That's
can't
what
we use
energy storage does. Yep.
Yeah. So can't we use school buses for this too? And what is the cost? I know we can. And what is the cost of buying electric school buses and infrastructure so we can use them both to shave peaks and increase load whenever needed?
So
Towards a virtual power plant?
as you know,
When I just finish one, and then jump in and
sure.
And can't a citizen offer an amendment during the special town meeting to change the word battery to energy? Because I'm agree we should do that, and I'm willing to.
Are you all set?
I also agree that there's a whole lot of things that need to be done in the future, and it's hard to do them all at once, but I definitely think we should at least be investigating them, because what we do now can stop us from being able to have the opportunity to do really good things later if we don't get them all at once.
Yeah. So I agree. That is possible that we could change battery to energy as an amendment on town meeting. It could, if the moderator allows, it could be done as a change in the motion, but I don't think she's going to. The school buses, 2020, we made sure that they had funding to do a small pilot to see if we could scale it up. The federal money is there. It didn't come together. We had a pandemic. The schools have changed their opinion, so we don't have that available. And yes, like hydrogen, it is kind of more cutting edge, bleeding edge, so it's not as commercialized an option as lithium phosphate. So it's not something I think would meet
Yeah.
this need. But yes, I do feel we should continue to pursue that and things like hydrogen for longer horizon, more pilots. Can I
Is
get
that what the
those?
Energy Task Force is going to do
I
in the
I don't-
future? The Solar Task Force,
I don't know.
it's going to
That's
going, isn't it?
that would be up to Dean and the Solar Task Force. I'm going to move on to Dinos. Dinos, your question.
Hi there. I really had a couple questions that are related. And the first one is whether anyone at the light plant reached out to a large utility that already has some challenges with high penetration distributed energy resources on its distribution circuits, and what that utility might have done that was successful to fix it. So that's my first question. And second to that, related to that, I talked to Dave Wood earlier, who said that when this situation came up, what they did is they manually shifted some circuits from one bus to another bus to equalize the loads, which seemed like a problem that could be accommodated or fixed with some automatically controlled switchgear. And the issue was primarily voltage problems related to reactive power support. So I'm just trying to get a little more detail on the technical due diligence for figuring out how to solve this problem.
Do you want to take that, Jason?
Yeah. So the thing I'll mention about other MLPs that might be in the same exact situation, I was at an E&E board meeting recently with several other MLPs, and I brought up this topic. None of them are dealing with this because either an MLP is too small to even have the scope to deal with the problem, or they're too big where they don't have the problem because they have such strong load profiles and their solar saturation is not at the level that Concord's is. So none of the people that I polled of 7 or 8 other MLPs. I've also reached out to another MLP just to find out if they had this issue, and they didn't. They're thinking about it now. It's on their radar, but we're just not in the same place in this situation as they are. So I heard a lot about battery storage from them. They all were excited about it, but basically as a savings for their ratepayers and for the reasons that we talked about for the economics of them. Regarding the other question about switching, I'm not an engineer, but I talked to Joe and the engineers, and the message that I've been told is that's not something, even from Dave Wood, that you could just go down and move something over. Long term, if we want to think about redistributing how we provide power, something we can do, but it's not a short-term fix. And with each solar site that comes online, you're looking at 700 kW here, a megawatt there. We would have to do this each time. And even with SCADA, I would argue it's not going to be something we can just easily shift the load. And while we don't see a lot of solar penetration on bus 1, if you do pursue anything at the school and you do pursue expanded solar on the landfill, they're going to be right with bus 2. And so it's not like a problem that we have tons of load on bus 1 that, if we could just equalize it, we'd be out of the woods for several years. I don't get that sense. I don't know, Joe, do you feel like you have anything to add that I didn't cover on the switching question?
No, that's pretty much it. One of the bigger things for us is having the contingency of having 2 feeds come into town. When you tie things at the substation, you have to take out one of the feeds coming into town. So essentially, we'll be on a single contingency, which is where we never like to be, because if anything happens, we wouldn't have our backup power supply for the town. So we could basically lose everything. So aside from some of the other issues you brought up earlier, circulating currents, things like that, that could seriously damage equipment, we'd lose our contingency if we lost one of the legs coming into the town, which can happen on our end. It could happen on the Eversource side. It's just part of a distribution system, but we have to be ready. That's why we have just the way this substation was designed with, you know, 2 redundant feeds into Concord.
And I get totally that it's very important for there to be 2 redundant feeds. What exactly happens when there's a low power level on one of the feeders that causes a problem? Is there a voltage problem or is there something else?
Voltage problem is probably one of the primary issues, you know, that we deal with, but there are other things that show up. You know, there are harmonic issues. There are a lot of things that, you know, need further analysis from us that's why we're moving towards this SCADA system that will give us, you know, basically that vision into our system. But voltage is probably one of the primary issues.
Yeah, but it's also if the amount of solar. So if we lose another large customer and MCI, we get down to what the system is not designed to handle. And if we add solar, we're doing the same thing. We're in that just simply we have too much in-town power and we don't have the ability to backfeed. So the metering domain in the SCADA is the project to resolve that issue, but that is going to be a longer term project. Is that right? There isn't a shortcut way to absorb or create load with moving feeder lines and other things.
Not really.
Hey,
Okay.
thanks. I really appreciate your jumping in on this, Joe. Good to hear from an engineer and look forward to talking to you later on. So
Yeah, can I just make one quick comment? Would be like a dumbed down, very dumbed down version of this. Solving voltage doesn't solve load. So
Right.
like, I know Dinos, in some of the papers you sent us on solutions to voltage regulation, there were some utility examples where the utility was experiencing voltage fluctuations within their system, and there are technical solutions to deal with that. But they weren't, the system as a whole wasn't surplus power. They had, solar in certain parts immediately coming on and causing voltage disruptions within the distribution system, but I didn't see any evidence that those utilities actually for the entire system were surplus. I mean, there's no way to use voltage regulation to solve a lack of load. If you have too much solar and you're going to go negative, voltage regulation is not going to help you.
So again, I don't think I'd want to take too much more time on this going into these details, but they are very important and interesting. Certainly at the transmission level, there's bi-directional flow with protection devices that work bidirectionally. And the whole topic of high penetration renewables is an important one. So requires a lot of thought and analysis to figure out how to approach it.
And we are pursuing those reverse transmission flows but there are a lot of legal and regulatory issues associated with that, as well as the technical ones.
Yep.
That's that 2+ year time horizon for metering domain. It's where we'd like to be, but we can't get it fast enough. I don't see any other questions, so I'd like to go to the board and request a motion to support the article as written. And if you want any kind of caveats, let me know now. Raise your hand and we'll. I don't think I heard of any real caveats that we need to change other than maybe that one word. Bianca, did you want to give a thought before we do a motion, or did you want to do the motion?
You asked for caveats, so I just wanted to ask for or put down the caveat on the wording that it be expanded not just to battery.
To energy. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to make the motion in support of the article, and we'll take a vote? Or Bianca? Sorry.
No.
Okay. I as chair shouldn't be making motions, so I need Warren, do you mind making a motion to support the article?
Yes, I move that the Light Board support the article as written.
Okay, do I have a second from John or Bianca?
Second for me.
Great. And John, do you want to vote in favor or not in favor?
In favor. Yes.
Great. And Warren
In favor, yep.
and Bianca?
This is a difficult one for me. My concern is that we are asking for a borrowing, an amount to borrow and limiting the options of what we can do with that money borrowed, without, at the very least, having had a conversation about a possible option that could be much cheaper. I understand that the number one priority was the integrity of the grid. The number two priority was to allow for more solar, and number three priority was peak shaving. I think both number one and number two could possibly be resolved. It's a question. It's just a simple conversation that I believe we should have prior to committing to a quite a large debt load. And if the article could be changed to just be more expansive so that we have full ability to pursue other avenues if they are viable, I would be in support.
Okay, so if that wording was changed from battery to energy, you'd be clearly in support.
Or just storage, you know.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just storage, grid scale storage. Yeah. So you just want more options available under this article.
Yeah, I don't want us
Technology solutions.
Yeah.
But if we're doing it as written, would you still support it, or would you not want to have borrowing available for any solution? Because we're up against town meeting, special town meeting rules and deadlines, and I just want to know, is your need to explore other energy storage devices other than lithium phosphate make it such that you don't want to support this article as written because you'd rather see it because
I think I object to these artificial timelines, and these timelines seem bureaucratic. Like, just because somebody decided that,
timelines in town meeting.
yeah, I mean, the article as written, now we are suddenly pigeonholed into one singular place because of a bureaucratic process at town meeting. And I think that this is a real problem. This is much bigger. And I think that this bureaucracy is not, I don't want to be beholden to bureaucracy. So if I don't know how else to express it, but I think it would be, it sounds ghastly that I would have to vote in favor of spending $10 million just because of a bureaucratic holdup.
No, again, all this does is authorize us for the option of a battery storage solution. It does not require us to utilize it in that manner, but what it does bar us from doing is borrowing for it depends on interpretation. If people interpret battery as energy storage, anything's fine, but I don't think that's the case. Jason, can you?
Yeah, I would point out that if the board, fully supported this, if town meeting approved it, and we got 6 months in, realized that the battery was not the way to go, there was another energy storage option, we could at next year's town meeting bring this up for a vote and change the scope. That's totally allowable, and that's part of that bureaucratic process. So this 10 million doesn't have to be for battery forever. If at a later date at a future town meeting, we want to reappropriate it for a wider scope or a different purpose, we can do that.
We do need a solution quickly. So that is why we're doing the special town meeting process. Warren.
Am I wrong, but isn't it the case that the light board, including Bianca, will need to vote on actually going forward with any borrowing at the point at which there's a plan in place?
Absolutely. Yep.
I can, but the problem is our vote would be restricted to, you know, a lithium phosphate battery, and there is no other option that we would be able to pursue until next town meeting. And I find this, predicament ghastly.
I don't think it's well, that you're stating your opinion, so Laura.
So Bianca, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I was thinking is if we were to do a hydrogen solution with PlugShare or somebody else, they would be putting up the capital for the electrolyzer, right? And they would likely be looking to us to supply them with guaranteed certified surplus power, right, for a period of time. So there wouldn't really be a capital requirement, I don't think, on CMLP's part. So if we get this authorization to borrow 10 million, and then it turns out the green hydrogen is a better, lower cost solution to our grid stabilization, I think we could go forward with it because we wouldn't need the 10 million for the green hydrogen solution. Am I thinking about that right?
You are. Yeah.
Brian, I didn't ask you, I asked Bianca.
I get excited about these.
I know.
Well, I do follow Brian in almost every way. So yeah, and you're right, Laura. That's in theory how I see it. But you know, we haven't had the problem is we haven't had even so much as a conversation with them. And I suppose if there is any capital cost, okay, here's my question. Let's say there's some minimal capital investment required for us to enter into a partnership with Plug Power. Could we do that without taking, if it's
Yeah.
could we reserves? Could we? Yeah.
We have depreciation funds. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Our SCADA system for $2 million, we don't plan on borrowing anything for that because we were going to use depreciation funds. So there's definitely opportunities for small and medium-sized projects that don't require borrowing. It's just these very large ones that do.
Okay. All right. My vote's yes.
Great. Thank you. And I also agree. And remember, this article just allows us to borrow for this kind of project. It doesn't make us do anything. It doesn't restrict our options. It actually expands them by giving us a borrowing power for an ownership model. So with that, we have a vote. I did take questions from the public earlier. I do want to give one final opportunity before we go for people to share public comments if they disagree with the vote or other things. So, Pamela.
13 Concord Green, Pamela. Yes. I remember your idea of putting in the first sentence about how it saves ratepayer money, including increasing the stability. But I think you also have to put in the same sentence, it also increases the green energy production. All three.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the trick. How do you get to have three priorities? Yeah. Any other, sorry, do you have more, Pam?
No, I mean, tell the people at town meeting in your presentation. That's real important.
Yeah, great.
It'll lower your rates over time and produce more green energy and stabilize the grid.
Yep, that's our talking points.
So it's a really good investment.
Yes. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Warren, do you mind making that motion?
I move we adjourn.
Great. Bianca,
I second.
John,
Yes.
great. Warren,
Yes.
Bianca,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Thank you all.